Welcome. It's Josh and Warren here. Well, we came up with our actual name for the podcast. It's called SJW.
Yes.
It's not Social Justice Warrior, but we kind of appropriated the name for some publicity. But
Yes.
Actually, SJW means S means Socratic, as in we're talking with each other and in dialogue. J means Josh and W means Warren. And I think it's quite a fitting name.
Yes, I think it is very fitting about our discussions, our approach, and our ideology. And before we get to start on talking about the topic of love, I looked at this pork or whatever it is, and I realized it brought back some very good memories of my youth. Mm-hmm. And especially when I went to a military camp. And, normally we in the West or in more modern countries, we like to see fat as something which you don't want to eat, something which is not very valuable. Now, when we went to military camp, I remember the best meal was basically pork with ginger and with fat on top of it. It was basically like this, but it's cut into stripes. And that fat tasted so good. It was so important. And I was so surprised. It's like I always didn't want to eat fat, but then somehow it was so important and so simple for your diet. And it's quite interesting in that sense.
Well, it just shows what culture can do to one. Because the demonization of fat probably started in the 1950s, since the kind of quasi-science or pseudoscience of cholesterol, which is still in debate right now, and they realize that much of it is false. It's very strange because my sister can't stand fat. She takes away every single fat, and I'm not sure whether a kind of cultural propaganda feeds into this.
I'm not sure whether it really is that fat that we're not liking, or whether we're scared we're going to get fat, and perhaps that eating fat is not a bit poor in any sense, but it's just that eating or tasting that fat, you might say, well, it's making you fat as well. But I think that's because we're very privileged.
That's true.
Because I met a lot of people, and especially my old Chinese tutor. Did I tell you that I have two Chinese tutors? One lived through the culture, both of them lived through the Cultural Revolution. One liked it, and the one who liked it said, well, we had so little fat that we didn't have oil. So the only oil they could to cook the pork and to cook the food was from fat. And fat was just so important because when you go scarce on resources, that fat just plays a significant role in your diet.
My dad also told me about this. He was born right at the height of the Cultural Revolution. So it's 69. Way better than my other uncles because they lived through like the Great Leap Forward and stuff. Well, hopefully I don't get sent to CCP concentration.
Yeah, so hope not. I'm a bit safer, but you're actually going back to China in a bit. So I mean,
I don't think they won't be able to understand. They won't be able to understand our conversation anyway.
Yes, indeed.
So the SJW podcast might be safe.
Yes.
Due to our name.
Yes.
Well, my dad, we talked about how we quite like eating vegetables, right? Do
you have a spoon by any chance?
I'll take one after I finish the anecdote. Okay. My dad told me that when he was young, vegetables tasted absolutely disgusting because there was no oil inside the vegetable. It was just super dry. And it's not even vegetable that's the commercial vegetables that we're eating right now are suited to our taste, our palate. Whereas they basically found veggies just in the countryside and took them in, just boiled them without any oil, without anything else, and they just ate it. Salt was scarce too, and it really tasted terrible. But that's what they had to live on. So I think one has to be quite appreciative of what one has. Yeah. Even though, just me saying this is quite an empty gesture. So I'll take a spoon for you.
Yes. So in the meantime, while he's talking about that, I'd like to start talking about, now that our anecdotes about fat and our discussion about fat has ceased, we will now start talking about, what we're actually meant to be talking about in the thumbnail, which is called On Love. And of course, love is a very, very, very broad topic. And I'm not going to say we're going to just cover all things about love or even talk solely about love. We'll use it as our starting point, our foundation, and then build off that foundation and hopefully find something interesting and something worthwhile to listen to.
Yeah, we hope it's almost like how a tree has a fractal-like structure. So you have the main trunk, and then it splits out into branches, and these branches almost serve as a trunk that splits out into other branches, and goes on like this. Well, that's sort of the ideal of a conversation, I think. You have a main topic over there, but it has an extremely complex and extremely interesting structure in that it stems up from everywhere else. But wherever it stands out, it it all originates in the center trunk.
I completely agree with that, and using trunk as like an analogy for conversations is really interesting, but especially using in the conversation about love. I think love is so much like that spreading out. You kind of like an iceberg effect, but instead of only having one thing at the top, you have so many different branches. You have that stem in the middle, which I think there's some same themes throughout all types of love. But then ultimately the variety, the different facets of love is just so immense and so broad that it's very hard to say, well, when I'm talking about love, that's the same love you're talking about, or the same feeling about every single person. It seems like I love you and I love my parents and I love, well, a lot of other people as well. It's like maybe the love I feel towards you is different from the love I feel towards my parents. And of course that's clear, but even between different friends, you have a small type of different love towards each one of them. And it's something very personal.
And it's almost something that is quite exclusive to Indo-European languages, because I think C.S. Lewis wrote about kind of like the 4 types of love in Greece, and there's 4 different words for love. Even though that's pretty, I won't use the swear word since we're on a Christian channel, but that's not an accurate representation of the historical like I guess facts. But it is true that there's almost like 10 or 11 words for love in Greek instead of I guess 4 for C.S. Lewis. But still, you see it's a very strange phenomenon that all 11 of them got integrated into a single word in English, and it doesn't necessarily disprove the concept of love. It's not like, well, when we talk about love, we're really talking about like 20 different things. It's almost like the English language realized that across all these diverse phenomena, there's something central to them all, and that's what we named love. It's very easy. We can name a lot of different kinds of love. Do you want to start?
Sure. I think you could always start with, as you say, C.S. Lewis is like the philos, the eros, the agape, and those kinds of love. And it's like there's kind of the love for the brother, there's love for the friend, there's the family. And I think that's a very interesting place to start off with. And there's also interesting thing about, well, is your love towards your friends the same as the love towards your family? And that's an interesting question. And the face value answer says no, but sometimes I find myself doubting that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the love for your family is closer to more of an unconditional love, and that's for sure. Like, you don't necessarily choose your family, whereas you do choose your friends, more or less so. And that, as a result, your love towards your family is more like, I love them because of who they are, whereas your friends, it's more like, I love them because of who they are, but more in the sense that their attributes instead of their nature as being your father,
mm-hmm.
as being your brother. It's that kind of comes more out of, I wouldn't say analytic because it's not analytic, but it seems to come out of an intrinsic nature of their identity in relationship towards you, which forms a sense of love, which seems more of a sense of closeness instead of perhaps love, because love, I think, has to be free. But then, are you freely choosing to love your parents, or is that something deeply ingrained into you, either as a societal or evolutionary construct? And that's something which I've kind of been struggling with.
I think there's definitely an evolutionary perspective and also a cultural element in the love for the family. But I think in a family, one still has to play one's role, or else the love cannot be sustained, because you can see there's a ton of broken families, and it's almost exactly because one failed to fulfill one's duty inside such a familial structure that the family breaks down. And with regard to your comments, wait, let me just put my bag down. With regard to your comments that we choose our friends, I would sort of disagree with this, because I think when you say one chooses one's friends, it's too active. It's a very modern conception of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we are able to do everything ourselves. We are able to will everything. Whereas I think the better representation of what love is almost a kind of mutual calling in some sense. It's like the other is calling towards me, and then I have to remain open to hear the other's calling, whilst I also make a call from myself where the other has to remain open to hear my call.
I think that's a very interesting concept, and I would say I agree with you more or less, because I definitely think it's true that it's not a completely active choice to be someone's friend. Developing that friendship, I think, would be more of an active choice. But having a relationship in the first place with them is definitely not less so of an active choice. For example, when I'm thinking about how I became a good friend of you, I can't really think of any defining moment or any defining idea or time. Of course, our time in America we spent together, that made us way closer. But beyond that, it was more just like being open to each other and receptive. Yeah. And that slowly developed and that slowly fostered without any other stimuli or any other active choice of our own.
Yeah, I love the idea of receptivity because it's a very beautiful idea. I think it's very it's a counterpoint to the completely active role that a lot of us think that we are. And I mean, we can explore more about which part of love is active, which part of love is about us doing the work and trying to love, and which part is complete, is just this kind of receptivity and calling.
And that's very interesting because, I mean, of course, there's that type of family love. And I'm not necessarily sure whether that is receptive, nor do I think it's necessarily active as well. It seems way more determined, at least at the start, than either being receptive and being open or actively choosing to love your parents. Because a young kid loves their parents clearly. They don't necessarily love them actively, I wouldn't say. Nor would I say they love them due to being open, because I don't think a young kid is necessarily open consciously or subconsciously to their parents in some sense.
You can almost say a young child is complete openness, I would say.
Yes, perhaps that's the case.
I think that's the beauty of childhood in some sense. Why? Because a child is almost complete potentiality. It's using a biological analogy. Well, at the start we have cells that's completely unspecialized, the stem cells, and they can become any other cell they want. But then as one grow older, the cells gradually specialize to the point where the stem cells, even the ones that eventually we have, can only be specialized into a certain category, whereas the original stem cell can become anything.
That's a very interesting point that you're raising, the idea of potentiality, and perhaps that ties into a bit of a theme of necessity, almost that the child loves their parent not only because they're completely open to that change, completely open to their parents, receptive to their parents, but also because they're fully dependent on their parents, and that also stems forth the form of love, in the idea of being meek in this, or the sense of being, or the sense of knowing that the parents don't necessarily need to care for the child, but still, despite that, there's a subconscious sense of knowing or knowledge that the parents don't have a direct obligation, not in the moral sense, of course, have a direct moral obligation to care for the child, but more so in the sense of the physical sense. The parents don't need to physically care after the child, but they still do so because they love the child. And it's the idea that we love, not necessarily because we deserve it, because the child hasn't done anything to deserve it, but there's a sense of unconditional love from up to down, which I think stems forth a receptive love. And perhaps that would be right. There is a receptive love from the child and an unconditional love from the parent.
Well, the parents are still receiving from the child, in a sense. Well, I almost want to challenge this point and play around with ideas a bit. It seems to me like the parents' love towards the child is almost a violence done to the parents. Because of what you said, there's although they have moral obligation, it's almost like they don't really have any other choice. They're almost coerced into helping the child, and almost want to play with this kind of dialectic tension between love and violence, in the sense that one can almost say, what do you think? Can we say that all love is a form of violence?
Well, yes, I'll agree with that, and it depends on how you define violence. But I definitely think that love can definitely become violent, or love by definition is violent, because love is a sense of vulnerability. It's a sense of being open, not only to love and happiness which comes with it, but also hurtness, sadness, weakness, and struggle, which comes up to it as well. And I guess looking at past relationships, both friends and with girlfriends and stuff like that, it's like, well, one of the problems why you connect and why I don't think my relationships were too loving was because I never let myself be vulnerable around those people. And I wasn't open to the possible violence or the possible tyranny or the pain that could arise from it. And that wasn't now you might say, well, that's a good thing. But I don't necessarily think that is a good thing. In the sense that it is, yes, you might get a bit less hurt, but at the same time, it stops you from experiencing the most human part of our existence, which is vulnerability, sharing, compassion, and support, which by definition seem to be grounded based on a fundamental sadness or hurt and violence. So it seems that you can't have love without the violence, and you can't have violence without the love.
Yeah. Almost, it's as if there's always a potentiality of violence implicit in every single relationship of love. And you talked about opening up, being vulnerable, and it's very interesting because you see what he does when you open up to someone whom you love, you're making yourself vulnerable, and you're placing a trust on them that you're telling them almost that that you know they won't exploit you. But to do so, you have to make yourself exploitable. It's like okay, I'll tell you a kind of joke. Okay, so the sort of authoritarian father will be like to a little child, hey, you have to go to your grandma, you have to go to visit your grandma because it's your duty. And then the postmodern father would say this, okay, it's fine. You don't actually have to go and visit your grandma. You don't have to go if you want to. But implicit in this, every single child who's properly socialized know that you have to go, even though it's a kind of, even though one's asking and giving you a choice, you only have one choice to choose. And it's almost the same as love, in the sense that you're opening yourself up, making yourself vulnerable, and you're pretty sure that the other will choose the path that you believe is they will do, but you're always opening a back door to them.
I completely agree with you on that point, and I think it's very interesting in the sense that it's so important to be open and know that you have to be vulnerable in relationships, and that is a key part of being loved and also being lovable, because it's very hard, I suppose, to love someone who is unwilling to open up to you, or unwilling to open up any of their weaknesses to you, because then you start dating someone or being with someone who just keeps on feeling to be perfect and keep on feeling to be ideal.
Now, of course, you have to strive towards perfection, or strive towards something better than oneself. But at the same time, it's almost as if you can only strive towards something better by exposing oneself to what's worst in one. And there's a very interesting tension there between you. You can only improve by descending into the negative. It's like the Hegel play of like positive and the negative. Well, in the negative, there is the positive within. And in the positive, in not showing anything out, there's also the negative of the kind of complete vulnerability that's hidden inside the surface.
I completely agree with that. I think it's very difficult for us to perhaps fully separate the nature of discussion or love from that inner violence. And to be perfect, you're meant to strive towards it. But at the same time, you know you can't achieve it. And that's a very interesting thing. It's like, why do we strive to achieve that which cannot be achieved? And that's a question that I think fundamentally is a religious question. It's like, why do you become a Christian when it's impossible to be a Christian, or a good Christian at that? I think the answer comes back to it's about love. For an ideal, for a concept, for a approach or idea about perfection, it all comes back to love, in my opinion. And I think that perhaps demonstrates the importance of love in its rawest form. It's it pushes you to strive to be someone who's better, and pushes you towards perfection, towards a perfect ideal, even if you know you can never achieve it.
Yeah. Well, love is a theme that's central to a lot of religions, or Christianity, obviously. But from Chinese religions, I know there's this line from the Tao Te Ching, because my dad basically asked me to remember the entire scripture when I was young, even though I can't remember it now. I know a lot of lines. There's this line which is something like, make yourself the world through love. And then it's almost like, once you are the world, through this love, you cannot die, because you become something else, or you are within someone else. And I think the lesson from this line is that when you're loving someone, it's almost a giving. It's a gift. It's you're putting a part of yourself into someone else, and you can see it in this way, because whenever you love someone, you're loving the ideal of them, and you're putting a certain expectation of them, and that's why sometimes it's very difficult to be loved. You can see like a lot of celebrities when with a lot of fame, it comes a lot of responsibility. That's almost cliche. You almost feel like you cannot live up to others' expectation of oneself in love a lot of times, and that's I guess what I also mean by love is a sort of violence. It's a violence that is also a gift.
And that's something which I agree on. I think it's so weird and paradoxical about Nietzsche's philosophy. He says it's the love of fate and the will to power. When it seems that when it seems to be impossible that love itself is the grounding or the root to any sense of power, because it seems that love is first a giving. It's a sacrifice of sorts, and how that possibly ties in with power. It seems that they're two opposites in the most opposite sense, and it seems that what Nietzsche calls the will to power and the love of fate, it seems more appropriately to just call it the lust of fate, or the pursuit of fate, instead of the love of fate, or the embracement of fate, because I think that's different from saying you love it, because saying you love fate would be to some sense surrender to it, and from your own perspective give up or surrender all possible power and potentiality to that fate, which would then seem to be a concept which Nietzsche would disagree with, if you got what I mean.
Yeah. And
if that truly is the case, then it surely raises the question of, well, perhaps, and that's why I'm arguing in the Nietzsche contra the Zarathustra contra Alyosha thing, that love is the sole problem with the will to power, because it's impossible for power to account for what love does to someone, in the sense that in no possible world would you imagine God coming down from heaven to die for humans out of power. It seems that the only thing which would describe that is love. And in the same way, what power comes from a soldier giving his life up for his friends, his comrades? That seems to just be out of love, out of duty, but not out of power. And it's in that sense where I think, well, I don't necessarily think that Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is very strong, and I think is fundamentally defeated within itself.
I want to ask you what you mean by power.
Well,
it's a very murky concept.
Yeah, power, especially with Nietzsche's idea. And I think Nietzsche's idea of power is not necessarily the Hitler kind of power, and says I have control over other people. I think Nietzsche's idea of power.
He would say that Hitler's kind of power is essentially powerless.
Yes, I think what Nietzsche's kind of power is, well, it's that power which allows absolute self-realization or absolute domination over and control over oneself, from which that leads to a relationship with others. It's that self-actualization, I think, which perhaps is the core of Nietzsche's idea of power.
Well, I think from here, you can see a subtle link between power and love. If you want to say power is supreme self-realization. And I'm not entirely sure about domination over oneself, that part. It almost seems too Christian for Nietzsche. It's like too ascetic. But just the part of self-realization, don't you think that loving someone else loving someone else is also a violence, not only to the other? I think it's a brilliant thing. It's also violence to yourself, in the sense that you have to when you love another, yourself also has to strive towards a potentiality, the better version of yourself.
I completely agree with that, but I think the difference lies within is that when you love someone else, you're not loving them for that sense of self-realization. You're loving them because of who they are, and your self-realization comes as a sacrifice alongside loving them as who they are.
Mm-hmm. Whereas
that's where the true question comes in: is, well, is that even power anymore? Because if we define self-realization as power, then doesn't the question then arise of, well, what if that self-realization is ultimately a form of love in and of itself? Because I can definitely imagine a situation where self-realization is indeed a loving thing to do, and is perhaps even more closer to love than power.
Mm-hmm.
Because self-realization comes from domination over, well,
I want to say that
I don't necessarily think it is, but it seems very difficult to self-realize without dominating or having control over oneself.
I would disagree here,
mm-hmm.
in the sense that you exactly cannot realize yourself. Or I feel like saying self-realization is a terrible phrase.
Mm-hmm.
It's filled with all these like new age connotations of just like, okay, I won't say the swear word. Of epistemological nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you want to talk about it, maybe the better phrase would be something like become who you are. No, not self-realization, because you see, self-realization, the emphasis is on not only on this realization, but only on the self. What it's stressing is you realizing yourself, and that's why we've fallen into the kind of trap of self-realization as a kind of domination over oneself. If you use the actual Nietzschean phrase, become who you are,
mm-hmm.
then it's a becoming that almost has no subject. It is a complete process. And this process, I almost want to say, is initiated by love. Well, I think I'm doing a very idiosyncratic reading of Nietzsche. I'm probably pacifying him too much. I'm giving him too much credit. But let's just pretend that what I'm saying is actually what Nietzsche's saying, or well, perhaps it's not. And then you can just assume that it's my own I guess viewpoint, in that love and power, if you define power as a kind of the will to power, is the will to really the will to become who you are, and this can only happen through love. And what you talked about love can be powerful. I think I'll give you a tissue. I think it's a very interesting problem again.
My apologies. I can't eat very gentlemanly or with one hand. It's become a bit of a chore every single time I try to do anything. But go on.
Yeah, because it's almost a chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
Did egg? No, not the egg.
Did the egg hatch a chicken? No, did the egg make the chicken? But I mean, it kind of does come from the chicken, but then.
Did love come from power? Does love lead to power? Does power lead to love? Or anything in between? Because you see, love can be extremely powerful. If you just see the non-violent protests in India, even though Gandhi's getting cancelled by SJWs and by us, and or in America of the kind of non-violence, it's very powerful because you see, once you use violence, then and that's why the use of violence is almost slightly appropriate when I say love is violence to other and violence towards oneself. What I'm saying, my meaning of violence is, I haven't got a clear notion of violence when I'm saying it. I would say this. I'm really talking nonsense, a kind of nonsense that has sense, or just to get away from all those nonsense. Because when I say that nonsense that has sense is also nonsense. You see, so. No, because look, once they got into the kind of Black Panther and Black Power movement, once one started to use violence, one immediately loses power. You see, because loses the power to bring about change. I think you're right in defining power as a kind of realization of process instead of a kind of infliction on another person.
Yeah, because that's why I think Hitler and Stalin and these dictators went wrong. Not necessarily because they didn't have control over other people. They definitely did have a lot of control over other people. But I think the main problem arises not from having power over other people, but not having power over themselves. They lost themselves in the process to control the world, and they fundamentally lost who they were. And that's when I think tyranny and despotism arises. It's when you lose sight of your humanity and you only focus on those who are around you. Because Hitler came out as a painter in the very beginning. He was an artist. How far can you be from an artist to a dictator? One creates, one gives life, one gives drawing, one produces, and the other one takes away in every sense of in almost every sense of the term. And I wouldn't necessarily think that the artist is incapable of becoming a dictator while being an artist. But at the same time, I think there was some sense of a loss of that art, that creation in Hitler, or that loss of himself that he couldn't find again.
But you've identified something very interesting. It's almost like Hitler went to the opposite of himself.
Yeah.
If you consider the dichotomy between artist and a dictator. But it's almost like a bad artist is a dictator, since that they want to control every aspect of their drawing, of the writing process. Whereas I would fundamentally argue, and that's kind of my metaphysics of creation, is that when you're really going to think for
It's fine.
Okay.
I can't. Even my chopstick skills aren't very impressive.
Yeah, well, it's left hand, so it's quite impressive already.
Yes.
But back to my creation metaphysics. When you're writing something, when you're creating something, even when you're playing the piano, you're not trying to control every aspect of the process. You have to do it at the start when you're a novice, because you have to get the basic mechanics down. Right? It's like you have to learn grammar before you can actually create. But then afterwards, okay, you can take it yourself. But afterwards, you have to, again, it's back to the kind of receptivity. You have to remain open. Let the art draw out you, not let you draw out the art. I think it's like a fundamental shift. A kind of, I would say, a Hegelian shift. I feel like I'm fitting everything in a. You can almost call everything Hegelian.
Yeah,
it works. Because Hegel talks about so many things. It's kind of funny.
Well, I'll agree with that in the sense that when I'm writing, when I'm drawing, when I'm creating, and even when I'm making YouTube videos, I don't have a script. I just turn on the camera and speak to it, and then just stop when I feel like it.
Yeah,
and
it's like us right now when we're talking.
I mean, we never had a script for this. I mean, in fact, we only decided the topic like 5 minutes before we actually started the podcast, and we managed to get so much stuff out because I think there's fundamentally a very profound or very fundamentally very intimate nature to creation, in the sense that I wouldn't necessarily say that art is controlling us, but more so it seems to be coming from within. But when I mean within, it's not coming necessarily from a conscious state of within. It's more like subconscious, if you get what I mean. It's our subconscious has the beauty, and we're but vessels for our subconscious, our inner thoughts or inner desires and beauty.
It's a very beautiful line. We're but vessels for our subconscious.
Yes.
It's like Lacan says, the unconscious has the structure of language. It's a very beautiful line. Or he says something else like, there's no sexual relationship.
That I vehemently disagree with. But though I do say, now that we're still talking about love, is that we could return perhaps once again to the idea of a father and a child, or a mother and a child, and not in the sense of a father-parental relationship which went wrong, but in an ideal sense of it.
Just talking about, because psychoanalysis fundamentally bases all love, all human relationship upon this relationship, this love between the child and the parent. I think you're touching on something very, very profound here. If Freud agrees with you.
And when we come into a relationship between the father and the son, or unconditional love, I think it's the most beautiful kind of love that you could imagine. Like, imagine loving someone unconditionally without any restriction, without any thought. It's like, I love you not because of who you are or what you do, but I love you because you are you, but not in the but then that's the problem. It's saying, when you're saying, well, I love you because you are you, that idea of reducing everyone to a you, it's such a reduction that I don't want to say it. But
what do you mean it's a reduction?
Well, because I think when a parent loves a child, and of course we're not parents, so I can't really fully explain how it feels like, but you love them no matter what they're doing, and you love them no matter who they are or what ultimately happens with them.
But then, again, you have to this love isn't affecting their present state either. Even when you're loving them despite who they are, you're also, I wouldn't say inflicting violence, inflicting force. So I would want to say love is fundamentally a force against oneself and against the other. Since that you're moving them someplace, you're giving them like a kind of push to somewhere else, to someplace better. You see, rather than you're both accepting them and changing them at the same time. It's a very intricate thing.
And that ties in perfectly, I think, to the love of God, in the sense that it's this fundamental love of this idea of unconditional love is ultimately what God, at least God's meant to represent. He is that idea of that love which loves unconditionally. And there's a question, I guess, which always raises at the back of the mind. It seems that unconditional love, by definition or by its very nature, hurts the person who's loving incomparably more than the person who is being loved unconditionally. Because Because the person you're loving might not even know of your existence, or might not even know that you care about them at all. They might do all that they want, not with any thought about you, of your well-being, of your goodness. But still you love them the same. It's kind of that bondage, if you get what I mean. It's that idea that you have to love them.
Mm-hmm. But
then, yeah, go ahead.
I would argue that when you're receiving this unconditional love, if you want to truly recognize or truly bear the extent of that love, you almost have to do as much as the person who's loving, but only if you truly realize it. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's something that I've been struggling with recently as well. I've looked at the suffering in this world, and I'm like, and this is not to say all the suffering in this world, but some of it. And when you look at that, you're like, well, what purpose, what telos does this suffering have? And at face value, you don't think it has much. Now I was thinking again, like, what if the suffering that you're experiencing is a reflection, it's a mirror, it's a way that you can use to appreciate the love or the sacrifice that God has for us. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about that, and a lot of things started to make sense. It was like, well, perhaps experiencing suffering is a way to appreciate, as you say, the gravity or significance of God's unconditional love. Mm-hmm. Because no matter how much we suffer, perhaps what really is the case is that God is suffering even more. And
I would say that we would want to separate two different kinds of suffering. Mm-hmm. There is just suffering, the everyday suffering that we have to go through. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a second kind, which is just pure evil. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where Socrates went completely wrong. What Socrates believed is that no one would consciously do wrong. Every single wrong action, every single evil action, quote unquote evil action, is only a lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. This I don't believe. I think there's something that is something that we can call pure evil, even though evil, this word is almost trivialized in our culture. Mm-hmm. But there's a form of purest evil, and that form of purest evil is when you do evil not for anything, not because you don't know anything, but solely because you desire evil. You see? Mm. It's like when you see the Holocaust. And also because the Holocaust actually didn't help Germany at all in the war. Mm. You really have to question whether there's any meaning behind that suffering, or the meaning behind that suffering is just this pure evil that you can't even start facing. You can only laugh at it. Mm. Because I mean, thinking about humor, you see, why something, because we always laugh at like horrendous things, right? It's like we say 30 to 50 million people died in the Great Fleet Forward, and then we start laughing.
Yeah.
You know, it's ridiculous. Mm. It's like you can't stop laughing at it. But why?
That's very interesting because I mean it's a sense of irony in the sense that we almost say 50 million people died in the Great Leap Forward as if it's some source of national pride in the sense that we're like, how did that happen so horribly wrong?
Yeah. And it's like we cannot comprehend it. That's why we can't even feel sad about it. Yeah. Because it's too large.
Yeah, it's like
too universal.
You sit in a big, you've gone under the camera. It's so universal that you've just gone under the camera.
It's so large and that we can't grasp it. And I think another explanation of it is something like in such a, there's no room for tragedy in such a form of, I guess, pure catastrophe, pure evil. Because in tragedy, you see, in Greek tragedy, the person suffering is still dignified. Mm-hmm. There's still some form of meaning inside your suffering. But when it is a kind of death the kind of meaningless death of 30 to 50 million people, or we just say the Holocaust, okay? You almost cannot make it a tragedy because there's almost no human dignity is destroyed there. You can only laugh at it because you can't find a subject to eulogize.
Yeah, I think and maybe it's just a fundamental psychological need. In the sense that if we were truly to imagine or bear on our shoulders the weight of the sadness and the gravity of the Holocaust, or of those 50 million people who died in the Great Leap Forward, I mean, you would be more than depressed. Like, you wouldn't even just be depressed and sad about it. I think it would be so much worse than just being depressed or just being sad. It's just something that is so horrible that you just can't comprehend it.
Well, if you truly realize that, you won't be able to do anything else.
Yeah.
Basically. We'll spend the whole day thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like when your family member has cancer, or your family member is suffering, or even like a death of a family member. Yeah. You spend the next few weeks thinking about it. It's on your mind constantly.
I'll actually say it depends on the person.
Yes, of course.
Well, for me, it's very strange, okay? Because I was there when my grandma died. Because it's very strange. It's almost miraculous in the sense that my entire family flew back into our hometown in like this very rural place. You land, it's so rural. Like you land on the airport, right? And it's like a 3-hour drive across like mountains. Okay, it's that far away from anywhere. And then it just as we arrived there, right? And then just me, my sister, my dad, my mom, and we were there, and then talking with grandma, and my dad called us back because grandma wasn't feeling well, and she was super old there, and she was in the bed already for like 2-3 years, and they all sort of had like a premonition that she's gonna go like in a week or so, and we came back, we visited grandma, and just as I was like holding her hand, and then I started crying, you see, and my entire family just we all started crying, and when we finished crying, we realized that grandma was dead. And I don't think I think about it often. You know, it's. I don't know if I should think about it more.
I would say you shouldn't, in the sense that it would be a sad thought. I'm not saying hide away your sad thoughts, but I don't think that's real. But in the sense that I don't think it's.
No, it's almost as if I don't feel sad about it. It's very strange, you know. I don't. Well, I know I'm supposed to feel very sad about it, but I don't really. It's and sometimes there's almost a guilt, you see, of not feeling sad enough about it. But
because I mean, I suppose there's one way which you look at it and you're like, well, you're sad because of the person, but at the same time, the person doesn't want you to feel sad about them. For example, if I died, right? I wouldn't want my friends to feel sad about it. I mean, maybe it would be nice to think that they would think a bit about it. But I wouldn't want them to like stop their lives and start crying about it the entire time. I mean, of course, it's difficult to say if I died because that's quite a weird thing to think about. But I suppose in the same way, like, and I suppose it's perhaps a selfless amount of love. I suppose the selfless approach to love, in the sense that you rather not, like, it doesn't matter what happens to you as long as the people you love, the people you care about are well. In the sense that you value their goodness so much over your own. But then there's still the question of, well, you take it to your grandma scale, right? And then think about it in context of the Great Leap Forward. Would it make it any more sad that one person died than 50 million people died? Maybe it would, I suppose, that more people died.
I don't know, because...
But at the same time, it's...
But I want to say that love is pure singularity. It's pure inequality, in the sense that you cannot love the entire world. You can love every single object in the world, every single person individually, but you cannot love the world as a whole. You can only love a thing at a time.
And that's the question is, I was thinking about it. It's like, well, you say one person dies, that's sad. 2 people die, that's more sad. 5 people die, that's sad. Your whole family dies, well, that's sad as well. It gets more and more sad. 1 million people die, well, that's really, really bad. But then you go up to 50 million people die. Well, which one's worse? I mean, of course, like, intuitively you think about 50 million people dying is worse. When you think about your emotional response to, imagine you open the news and it says 1 million people die. And the next day you open the news and you say 50 million people die. I don't think your sadness to both of them would be the same. It seems that the moment you reach a certain limit, there's a certain limit about how sad you can be over people dying.
I agree. And even more than that,
yeah.
It's
people might think we're very sadist, but it's not that where we're coming from. It's just
no. Yeah. In our defense, okay.
Yeah.
I would say that when you talk about 50 million people dying, you almost have to laugh about it. You can't take it any other way. You precisely cannot take it. That's why you're laughing.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, this is more, I don't want to say humorous because that's just horrible, but it's way more extreme than any possible novel could have ever imagined it. I imagine the worst novel you've ever read. Not in the sense of written poorly, but the biggest bad guy in every novel. No one kills 50 odd million people in any circumstance. Like that, even for a comic book, extreme. And when I mean extreme in a comic book, I mean very, very extreme. Even for comic book levels, 50 million people is horrible.
That's why
you look at reality, and that's even worse. It's like
that's why you see like a lot of post-World War II literature. They don't focus on the horror. It's very strange. They become very ironic. They become very funny. Okay, like this is Thomas Pynchon. It's a pretty famous contemporary American writer. I'm not sure whether you've heard of it. Him. He's got this very famous book called Gravity's Rainbow. Well, to be honest, I didn't find it really funny. But I know he wanted to make it funny. Okay, and it's humor in the most ridiculous places. It's like a person eating another person's shit in sexual intercourse. Okay, that's the kind of thing that he was writing about. And I think there's something very interesting about it because he set it in World War II. He went through World War II himself. And again, it's like Catch-22. You know Catch-22, right? It's absolutely funny. But then there's a complete emptiness in every single laugh. There's I don't know. You can't use words to describe it.
And maybe you're not even laughing because it's funny. I don't think you're laughing at like the Great Leap Forward and saying, "Oh, that's a very funny situation." I mean, maybe. I mean, just. I mean, you're looking at the Great Leap Forward and you're like, it's like history's like going like this. There's badge up and down, and you're like, you suddenly see it, and you're like, what the heck happened here? It's like even in a mathematical sense or scientific fact, you say that is an anomaly. Let's just disregard it totally. It's just
no,
that.
I would disagree with you. This is exactly the. Well, I have a very strong opinion about anomalies. Okay, I think a lot of like the scientific approach of excluding the anomaly. It is pseudoscientific. Because it is always an anomaly that counts. You see. Exactly like war. How long would it take for 50 million to die? You see? how many small words can add up to 50 million? I don't think all the words under 10,000 deaths can add up to 50 million. And that's like thousands of words. You know, words in entire humanity, the history of entire humanity of less than 10,000 wouldn't add up to 50 million casualties. But this one event, one anomaly, adds up to so much. And I think that's the absolute horror of atom bombs, because it firing is an absolute anomaly. But then, precisely because it's an anomaly, it's horrifying. And bring it back to love. I think love is just the same thing. It's an absolute anomaly. And here we can do a kind of Lacanian shocking statement. Love is war.
Yes. Why do I feel that love is war such a familiar phrase?
Really?
I don't know. Love is war. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think our entire conversation kind of builds up and agrees with that in the sense that it is fundamentally violent.
Well, I think that's like the beauty of conversation. We're almost like still almost like building on, like it's like harmonizing with each other, the different layers of conversation. It's like when we say love is war, well, it's an empty universal. But then once you have all the kind of layers beneath the love is war, it becomes something meaningful. It's a very fun thing to think about.
That brings another thing. Can love be love if it's orderly?
What do you mean orderly?
Well, organized, strict. Well, I mean, there's the chaos, the lack of control, the lack of predictability. Can you have love if it's purely predictable? Or completely in control? Imagine if you could reduce a relationship to almost of a kind of Hegelian or historicism, where you could determine every single part of it via certain facts and approaches. Would that consist of love? Or would that be love in its rawest form?
I would disagree. I wouldn't say that would be love.
Yeah.
Well, if you say it's, I think love cannot be predictable. If you purely think about the symbol of love, love, we said the most primitive love is, or primitive in the sense of most elemental, and most fundamental. It's a love between the mother and the child. And what this love symbolizes is absolute creation. Because every child, we said, every child is a potentiality. And in this sense, love is linked intimately with creation. And creation is always creation ex nihilo. And that's the great Christian contribution too. This creation ex nihilo of God. And it's very strange. And then even I think that's almost how the Christian creation story ties into the Christian emphasis of love. I mean, I'm perhaps playing a bit like fast and loose here, without the proper reading of the Bible. But still,
I pushed all the food onto the table. I have to apologize again. I'm very
sorry. It's fine. Because you see, it's with Augustine talked about love as he said love is almost, for Augustine, it's almost this metaphysical force that enables you to act. You got the will. The will is like, I can will this or that, and it is completely contingent. And how do you transform a will into an action? You transform it through love. So it's almost like love is this ultimate creational force, and that's why I would say it's unpredictable. It's like, and then that's why when you love someone, you cannot predict it at all.
Completely agree with that, and there's a phrase which is so beautiful in Augustine as well, and I'll speak some Latin because I actually it says "Si comprehendis nos Deus," which says what you understand is not God, or if you can understand it, that is not God you're talking about. But that's a very interesting phrase and a very interesting idea. There's an idea that if you look at God as the being of pure love, it seems that it is then going to be, by definition, impossible to fully understand him, because you can't understand anything within love, in the sense that it's unpredictable. In one sense, the action-wise, but also in the other senses, when you're in a relationship, there's some sense of lack of knowing. Because I'm just thinking about a situation where you know absolutely everything about your partner or your friend. I think instead of that love being amplified, I think it would be diminished.
Yes.
If I knew everything about you, I don't think our relationship would be as close as it is now.
Yes.
And in the same way, perhaps in order for God to be love, or anything to be love, it must first come from a place of a lack of certainty or of the unknown.
It's like when we're in this conversation, it wouldn't be interesting at all if you can predict what I'm going to say, and I can predict what you're going to say. But also, I think it's wonderful how you tie the love back to God, and it's the fundamental unpredictability. So, well, in a lot of postmodern literature, and postmodern literature is very different to postmodern philosophy. You have to separate the two. But in a lot of like postmodern literature, there's this absolute emphasis on the unknowable of other people, of how you're almost trapped inside your own head. And it's always presented as a very, very tragic phenomenon. And it's tragic in the sense that you can never know whether another is loving you or not. But you see, because once you start to question, you fall into a kind of skeptic position. You cannot be certain of the position of any other people. It's like, well, do I really know that you're my friend? Not necessarily. You act as if you are my friend, but how do I know you don't have any other motive? And even you can apply it to yourself, and that's when it gets really tricky. You see, you say I am loving someone else. You can start to question, am I really loving that person? Am I loving that person because, well, is my love of that person genuine, or is this love purely culturally conditioned? Am I really loving them, or is my culture really ordering me to love them?
And perhaps that goes to what I was saying before we started the podcast. Am I loving this girl because am I loving her because of who she is as a person in reality? Or am I loving that image I create of her in my mind?
I want to say both. And it's not an either or. I want to lead you out of the kind of cul-de-sac. If you choose this as an either or, then of course you won't be able to go anywhere with this. I want you to play it Hegelianly, okay? You can set it as a kind of dialectic. There's the her and the real. But then you can never say anyone is really anything, because we're all becoming. And the very interesting thing is that you can never know. You can never know who you are, precisely because you are different towards any single person. You see? When I'm dealing with you, I act differently than when I'm dealing with my other friends, or when I'm dealing with my parents, or when I'm dealing with my teachers.
And perhaps I think that's where the postmodern, I think, is wrong. They see that lack of understanding about others as a problem. I fail to see it in the same way. I think it is the greatest blessing that you don't know fully about others, that you're almost stuck in a solipsistic trap. In a sense, it's that is the grounding, that is the starting point of all love. It starts off in some way with the unknowing. And love is that which allows you to interact with what you don't know and allows you to find potential out of that lack of knowledge.
And here is where you're almost like doing therapy for me, you see. Because I was very deep into the kind of postmodern literature's dialectic, specifically David Foster Wallace's dialectic. Okay,
I read a bit of his work, and I was like, and then the only part I remember from his good old Neon was I fingered this girl when I was a kid, and I was like, what that? And then after I put down the book, and I'm like, that's the only thing I've gotten out of David Foster Wallace.
Well, I think good old Neon is a brilliant piece.
Yes,
good old Neon is precisely talking about the exact same thing that I'm talking about here. The person is suiciding, right? But he's also questioning why he's exactly suiciding. Is he suiciding because he really wants to suicide? Is this a true metaphysical suicide, or is this a culturally conditioned suicide? You see, and I mean, you made a brilliant move there in a complete frame shift from the tragedy of the unknowable other into the complete blessing. And then, I don't know. I think it's very beautiful. I just want to dwell on it a bit.
Yes. And the thing from Good Old Neon, I suppose, is it's very similar to The Dream of a Ridiculous Man by Dostoevsky.
No, David Foster Wallace was extremely influenced by Dostoevsky,
and
especially when he's writing Good Old Neon. I think because it's his last work before he suicided, and he reviewed like Dostoevsky, Joseph Frank's Dostoevsky, so like the super long biography, like 3,000 pages, I think like 3-4 years ago. So he was probably deeply influenced by Dostoevsky. So he basically went through the entire corpus along with like a 3,000-page biography for like 3 months of his life.
And that's where I think Dostoevsky fundamentally represents perhaps that fundamental problem that you're experiencing. Is it the terror of that kind of the unknown other, or is it the beauty of the unknown other? And in Dostoevsky's sense, the unknown other is in some sense God.
Mm-hmm.
Is it terrible that you don't understand God, or is it beautiful that you don't understand Him?
Well,
and that's
it's both.
Yeah, I'll agree with that completely.
Well, if you say that the unknowable other is God, then it's almost as if there's something divine about every person because every person is unknowable.
I think there's perhaps a different.
Well, yeah, I want to ask what's the exact difference there?
Well, I think there's perhaps a different of a hierarchy of it,
mm-hmm.
But in the same way, what the Genesis story put on so well is that we are made in the image of God. There's part of God in all of us, and that's why I don't think anthropomorphism is as big a problem as a lot of people think it is. So I think we're fundamentally the things that we see in us, which is similar in God, is not necessarily us creating God in our image, but us in the image of God. So then that's beside the point. I think I choked on some pork in my mouth.
Oh, I thought you choked on some. Well, it's the Christian channel. There's something else in such a PO. I don't think your pastor will know, but.
I think what Dostoevsky does beautifully is that when you have that starting point, I think the only way to view it is through the sense of love, because you look throughout the works of Dostoevsky, there's just so much suffering, there's so much pain, and when you think about it, Dostoevsky throughout his own work, he's a person of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's as much a doubter as any atheist, or if not, in some sense, he doubts it even more.
Well, that's the greatest of Dostoevsky, I think.
But then you think, well, why is he still a Christian? And I think the entire corpus, or the entire body of Dostoevsky's thoughts can go down to this one sentence, which he writes in his letter to Nastasia, or Natasha. I forgot exactly who the name is, but he writes, well, I am a child of doubt, but at the same time, there is nothing so beautiful, so lovely, so handsome, so kind, so beautiful as Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of the perspective which you come from. It seems that the only solution to this problem is indeed love.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way you could solve it. And that's why a lot of people look at Dostoevsky and say, well, that's sadness, that's depression. I look at that and it's shattering, it breaks. The only way, I think, to recover from it is to look at it from a lens of love. Because where you have the darkness, the love shines all the clearer. And it's with that great mystery, which I think it brings forth the greatest sense of beauty.
Well, there's a line from Holden's hymns that Heidegger used in his, probably one of his most famous essays, The Question Concerning Technology. And the line is, where danger lies, the saving power lies also. And that in each chaos, there's always a dancing star, using Nietzsche's phrase. And that's almost the supreme beauty of love. I know it's an absolute paradox, you see, and because Hannah Arendt precisely critiqued Kierkegaard on this point. She admired Kierkegaard greatly, and her critique of Kierkegaard basically summarizes in that Kierkegaard brought doubt into faith, but faith is the only place where you cannot bring doubt into it. You see, and perhaps I don't know what your response of it would be.
Well, I think it depends on how you define faith. Because I agree with you. Some people like to see faith as that which doubt cannot exist in. That faith is some sense of blind faith. What I like to view faith is not some sense of one which does not allow doubt. Nor do I think it's a completely rational decision. I think one of the biggest problems of the apologetics movement is to try to purely rationalize a belief in God into analytic tradition, or with analytic tradition to purely rationalize it.
That's what I don't understand with.
I'm not saying it's wrong, or I'm not saying it's bad.
See, I think the problem with that approach is that it won't convince anyone.
Exactly.
You won't be convinced if you believe in God. You won't be convinced at all if you're an agnostic or an atheist. But I don't think anyone starts to believe in God because of the ontological argument.
I agree with you. I'll say that there may be a few people who come to with this. But I don't think a lot of them come. I don't think a lot of people come to God through that. And I don't think that's because the arguments are very bad. That's not why I think it is.
Yeah, I think the arguments are profound.
Yeah, because I think that no one really comes to any belief, irregardless of whether it's about religion or not, purely because they think it's the most rational thing to believe in. Do you come to believe in other minds and other people because of the skeptical arguments, or do you come to it because you have a fundamental intuition or a fundamental necessity that other minds exist?
Well, that's true. So you can write about skepticism as much as you want in your study. When you go out, the philosopher is still going to be like a good person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I think it's a problem with the philosophers. It's purely the sense that they philosophize about literally everything, then they ultimately lose exactly where they are. You could philosophize all you want, and that's all right, of course. But at the same time, if you can't be willing to live out what you philosophized, I find a significant problem in that. And it ties back to ultimately the idea of the love, right? And about faith. I love the faith of Dostoevsky. The faith of Dostoevsky is, of course, there's reason, but I think it's a perfect mergence of that reason, that doubt, the fear, and the love. And he comes through God, and he comes through to God, I think, through beauty. Because in The Idiot, he says when he looks at the picture of Nastasia Filippinova, and then they ask Prince Mushkin, well, what do you think about her? And he says, well, those eyes, so tormented, that past. And it says, well, but that beauty would save the world. And that beauty isn't a sense of that beauty of God, or maybe in some sense it is, but it's that beauty of redemption, which I think saves Dostoevsky from nihilism and struggle and solipsism. But then to Dostoevsky, you can't have redemption without God. And in the same way, I suppose that's where you start your faith from.
Yeah.
It comes from that redemptive nature of man. That man can make something better out of his situation. That man can overcome his rock. It's not just some Sisyphean or Sisyphician, I can't even pronounce it, like paradox or a problem. It's that overcoming of that rock. He's no longer forced to watch it roll back down again, but he's redeemed. And he no longer needs to push it down because he could push it up to a point and succeed.
I don't know. I would disagree with the characterization.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of truth in it, but I want to change your description of Sisyphus slightly. Mm-hmm. It's not that after redemption it's a straight way up. I think first, when you're pushing it up, you never know whether it's going to drop back down again. That's the part of the faith. And also, perhaps in a kind of improved Sisyphus or a redeemed Sisyphus, okay, he's able to push the rock high, and then let the rock may drop. It's like he pushes up to here, the rock drops down to here, and he starts pushing up again, slightly higher, and then he drops down again, and he goes up. I think every improvement is like this. It's never a linear process.
Yeah. I wouldn't say. Mm-hmm. I suppose what I was trying to say is that it allows you to escape from the curse of it coming down every single time to exactly the same place. Mm-hmm. It allows you to progress and move towards a certain destination.
But I want to say, here's where I really disagree with you, mm-hmm. in that you can never discard the possibility of it falling down all again, because the problem with the rock pushing up, and that's what the myth does not specify, you see, is how far away that Sisyphus has to push until the rock falls down. It can be forever. It can be eternity. It can be like after 10,000 years of pushing up, maybe he's ready. He pushed up to the heavens, and then the rock drops down. You see, yeah. You never know when the rock drops down.
He was in hell and he was pushing up. He's escaped hell and he could have ran away. Then it just rolls down and he just runs back down to the bottom of the hell again.
Well, that's pretty funny because Sisyphus was actually a character who escaped hell, and he got caught back into it again.
I think that's an interesting critique. I don't necessarily say that it would defeat what I was trying to get at there, though, because
I think it's fundamentally building on it.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that this is kind of this loop or this kind of this problem, but at the same time, I don't think it. I think human life is like Sisyphus, mm-hmm. but perhaps like your reformed Sisyphus, and I agree with that. I think there is that kind of redemption, that constant redemption, which allows you to get a bit higher every single time.
Or maybe Sisyphus represents not the human condition, but the human situation. You see, the difference between condition and situation is that it's a situation is a particular part of the condition, and the situation would be a kind of lurking possibility that's always there. You may just end up like Sisyphus. You may end up pushing up, and then fate just strikes you in the face, and you fall down again, maybe even lower than you start. It's kind of like I have to reform Sisyphus, and now I have the I have the kind of, I don't know what word can you use, the beaten up Sisyphus, or the made worse Sisyphus. I don't know. You should think of a better word.
I don't know.
So like a kind of Sisyphus, it's like the more you push up, the more you fall down. It's like you don't. This is the baseline. The normal Sisyphus, you push up, fall down back to the baseline, push up. The reformed Sisyphus is you go up and go up, go up, and then you have the pathetic Sisyphus. The pathetic Sisyphus is the more you push up, the more you fall down. You fall more, and then you drop down the more you try.
I wouldn't necessarily call that pathetic Sisyphus. I think it's a hard-working Sisyphus, which just doesn't work. Because like the kulaks in Russia, the more they work, the more they get taken away from them. And they're like, they continue working, and then after that they just get shot. They're like, why are you working? Just get shot instead. I'm like, excuse me.
That's it. It's just a human situation. I think that it's always a possibility. You see, because the kulaks did not know that. they were gonna get hard work Sisyphus on. until it dawned on him.
Until they came knocking on the door, like, please give us your food in the forced collectivization campaign. You're like, oh no, I messed up.
Well, yeah, we're laughing again because it's I don't know. You cannot respond with laughter. I feel like it's also almost the same in love too. And, well, going back to a kind of romantic love, you see. I don't know why I'm saying you see so much today. You see, it's a good filter, I think.
I know, yeah.
A better filter than or
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it sounds very weird because I purposely cut off all of my and ohs, so I never say it, and perhaps it even sounds bad to be honest, by cutting it off completely. Anyways, the romantic love lies precisely the possibility of the three forms of Sisyphus. Okay, we can say the high Sisyphus, the middle Sisyphus, and the low Sisyphus. The kind of high Sisyphus is romantic love is this process of a constant struggle against the other. That's what we talk about love as war. It's a struggle where you can progress and progress and progress. Because love can never be perfect. A romantic relationship, it always has imperfectities. I don't know what's the word, but anyway, what you picture as perfection inside your head when you think about the person that you love, well, it's never the reality. But then the real is something, if we think of it as the situation of the high Sisyphus, something that can be improved on towards the ideal. But then you have the middle Sisyphus, which is, I think most of romantic relationship. It's just a constant struggle. You see, it gets better. It gets better. Like no. Yeah, I won't use the swear word.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no.
And then you go back. It's like okay. I had a fight with my partner, and then slowly building up the relationship, took her out to a date for a few, and then we're almost back together. She's willing to have sex with me, etc. and then you have fight again.
That is like, oh no.
Is that Christian? Was that Christian? I think that's pretty Christian.
Yes, man can go. Oh yeah, just a reminder, this is my good friend Warren. He's not necessarily a Christian. He's perhaps an agnostic or an atheist, and he has a channel called Thinker's Kitchen. So if you want to go check that out, make sure you go check it out. And we could go back to our discussion on Sisyphus and love. Continue.
Yeah, and then you have the middle Sisyphus, that is going back, and that's kind of eternal recurrence, a terrible eternal recurrence. It's eternal recurrence of struggle. It's what Nietzsche calls the greatest burden, and then at last you have the low Sisyphus. The more you try to engage in a relationship, the worse it gets.
You can't even get into the relationship. You just keep on getting rejected and rejected and rejected. It's like the hit rate of 0. The low Sisyphus. It just doesn't work at all.
No, I think being constantly rejected.
It's not a bad thing, though. I have to admit, it's not a bad thing.
I would say
you learn from it.
It's better. It's better than getting into a relationship and then to realize that you're in a low Sisyphus.
Yeah.
And it's like you're trying to hold on to a relationship, but it's just getting worse and getting worse and getting worse.
Yeah, that's the. I mean, I think the worst part of a relationship is always the month or a few days before it ends.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know your partner good enough, you know that will end very soon. You know that's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what happened in the past with me and my girlfriend. And we knew it was going wrong. We knew it was getting worse. We just couldn't do anything about it. Like, there was nothing we could have done, or at least at that time, I don't think there was anything we could have done.
It's almost like watching two trains crashing with each other.
Yeah.
By someone like shifting the rail track.
Yeah.
Or just watching the rock rolling down the hill and just rolling faster and faster.
Yes. And the worst thing I think is in some ways with a relationship, what makes it even worse is kind of that you push that rock yourself.
Yep.
Or you're driving that train and it's going into a crash and you can do absolutely nothing to do about it. I love the train analogy because it's true. It's like there is a driver to it, and that's the driver of both of the people.
Yeah, and also, there's something very, very interesting about the rock analogy too. Yeah. Because if we think about it in mechanical terms, the gravitational potential of the rock is always generated by yourself. It's a kinetic potential generated by our chemical potential energy goes to kinetic energy. Use the kinetic energy to push the rock up, and in the process, a lot of the energy is dispersed. But at the end, you still got a bit of force to get the rock up, and then transfer it to the gravitational potential energy of the rock. And then when it comes down, it's no one else's fault. The energy is your own. You see?
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thought, and I think these three Sisyphus, and I don't think it's just about relational love or like in a relationship. I think it's all types of love also has those three potentials.
Yeah.
And, it's...
And I think romantic love is often the most tragic one.
Yeah, I mean, because you commit, and it's something that's it's the least rational of all of them.
I agree.
It's just...
Well, what do you think about its irrationality?
It's just some sense of it's just some sense of like you lose so much control over yourself in it that to withhold that control, or how do you say it? That to it's irrational because not only do you lack control over it, you also lack all potentiality over it as well. And you lack all, I don't know how to put it into words, but it's just so incontrollable, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think there's something beautiful about its incontrollability. And it's what we talked about before, about the love as the absolute unknowable. And it's exactly this irrationality that is beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we've established before that love with rationality is not love.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to.
It's just calculation.
Yeah. And
it's almost disgusting.
Yeah. It seems that at the heart of human nature is sacrifice via love.
And sacrifice is always of the structure of the Sisyphuses.
Yeah.
Sisyphi. Of the
Sisyphi. Yes.
Love is of the structure of the Sisyphi.
Yes. And then next day we wake up, this video becomes a hit, and it's like, and then we read the news, and it's like, love is the structure of the Sisyphi, and it's like the headline.
I think this should be the title of our this discussion. Love is of the structure of the Sisyphi.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot today already, and it's like around 1 hour 30 minutes. I think we've speaking to you gives me so much content to upload separately as short videos that I almost want to create a new channel called this SJW podcast, just as a channel, so that we could just upload short videos from these discussions. But yes, I think it's a very interesting place to end off this discussion with. It's that.
That's the irrationality.
Yes,
of love.
That's the irrationality of love.
That is when fate blows you. I don't know, not fate. I think it's definitely a Freudian slip.
Yes. I mean, the Greeks used to anthropomorphize fate into the females, right? With the three fates and the three women of Electo, and I forgot the other names. But yes, I think that's a good place, an appropriate place to end off our discussion. I think we've talked a lot about love today. I don't think we've covered all about love because it's such an in-depth topic, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next time we come together we continue talking about love. But
I think we've had a lot of progress.
Yes, I think it's a lot of progress, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Like always, if you want to check out my good friend Warren here, you can go check him out on Thinker's Kitchen. To the one person who's watching right now live, hope you're having an absolutely phenomenal day. Like always, stay safe. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you do, make sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Really helps this channel grow. Share it with your friends if you want this content and also think they might be helpful to them. Stay safe. God bless. Like always, hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching.